How's it going, everybody? I'm so glad you're here, and today we're going to be talking about Eddington, written and directed by Ari Aster and starring Joaquin Phoenix, Pedro Pascal, and Emma Stone. In May of 2020, a standoff between a small-town sheriff and mayor sparks a powder keg as neighbor is pitted against neighbor in Eddington, New Mexico. If that synopsis sounds insufferable to you, I understand, but just wait because I feel like there's a lot we need to discuss when it comes to this film. It's one of the first films we've gotten in the post-COVID era that actually dives headfirst straight into the COVID era and makes a film entirely about that. I think we've finally reached the point where we're a little bit more comfortable talking about these things since we're just far enough removed from it to where we haven't fully forgotten, but we're still a little uncomfortable by it. I think this is the perfect time to do it. And Aster's style of filmmaking is also something that I think lends itself really well to a story like this, because this film is absolutely a black comedy. There's violence in it, there's gross images, there's lots of things that are meant to shock you, which is kind of par for the course with Aster's work, but overall I would consider this film a comedy, which I think works far better than making something that's a straight up horror or something like Hereditary or even Midsommar. When talking about COVID, I don't think we've reached that point where we're ready for a full-blown horror film about it yet, but there's just enough in this film to kind of test the waters a bit. I was very excited to see this. I think Aster is one of the most provocative filmmakers working today. He's an instantly recognizable voice. He's one of the most talked about filmmakers of this era. He's one of the fastest growing filmmakers of this era, and he's becoming one of my favorites. I think Hereditary and Midsommar are both near masterpieces. Beau is Afraid is great. I do think it's self-indulgent, but I think what that film is trying to do, it succeeds whimsically at. And Eddington, I would put in a very similar boat to Beau is Afraid. There's a lot going on in this film, and Ari Aster is trying to tackle probably the most things in one film so far in his career, but I think it mostly works. There's things about it I don't love, but overall I think that this is a very solid effort from him, and some of the most confidently experimental direction that he's done yet. Hereditary and Midsommar were two films that were directed very, very precisely. It never really seemed like throughout either of those films that there was any room for experimentation. Every shot seemed planned down to the millisecond, and for those films it absolutely worked. I'm not criticizing that choice at all, especially with Hereditary. I think that that precision is necessary for a film like that. It adds to the horror, it adds to the tension, it adds to the suspense, it amplifies all of the performances. I have no complaints with that style at all. With Beau is Afraid, it felt a lot more like Aster was sort of trying things out and making up his new formed style as he went along, because Beau is Afraid was not a straight horror film like the previous two films in his career were. Beau is Afraid was certainly an experiment, and with that came more experimental direction and shots that didn't seem like they were planned as thoughtfully. And stylistically, I think that that worked for that film, but in terms of experience level with Aster, he was still kind of working out the kinks. With Eddington, I think he's found a very happy medium here. As par for the course with Ari Aster's filmography, Eddington utilizes so many long takes, and in this film, they're probably the most choreographed they've ever been, but they still maintain that sense of spontaneity and experimentation to them, and I think that in this film, it works better than ever. Stylistically, it works. Thematically, it works. I think all of that controlled chaos is the perfect avenue to go. I think that the direction in this film is absolutely spectacular. With that being said, this has some of the worst pacing I've seen in a film this year, but it also kind of weirdly works. And I'd like to talk a little bit about why that is without getting into spoilers, because the film's barely been out for 24 hours. As I mentioned before, there is a lot going on in this film. There are about 1 million different subplots. It's next to impossible to keep track of them all, but quite a few of them also don't really amount to anything. Emma Stone plays Joaquin Phoenix's wife in this film, and there's a very interesting idea that I think the film is trying to deal with. Emma Stone's character is a character who's kind of a stay-at-home wife, and she represents a large demographic of women in the early COVID era that were stay-at-home wives, stay-at-home moms, that were kind of discovering what it was like to be chronically online for the first time, and falling into sort of these MAGA red-pilled conspiracy theory traps. And in this film, that character is manifested in the form of Austin Butler, who kind of grooms Emma Stone's character, as well as several other characters, into believing in his sort of twisted, messed up, xenophobic, I guess you could say, ideologies. It's an interesting idea, and it's something that a lot of people could say that they witnessed firsthand, but it's not explored nearly as much as it should be, especially based on the promotional materials. Emma Stone is hardly in the film, and Austin Butler even less so. And it's a very interesting subplot, but it would be far more interesting and compelling if we spent much more time with it than we actually did. It got to a point where towards the end they were trying to wrap things up, but they were also trying to wrap up far more interesting things at the same time, to the point where you don't really care about it as much as you thought you were going to, which is sad because on paper it's a very interesting idea, but this film is trying to tackle so much. The film is just under 2.5 hours, and frankly it sort of feels like 3.5, and as I mentioned before, it almost kind of works because of the era it's dissecting. It almost gives itself a get out of jail free card, to the point where It can do whatever it wants. It can have no structure, it can have no plot, and it will be emblematic of the era, so who are we to criticize it? I understand that, and to a point I feel as though that is intentional, but there are also certain points where it's kind of undeniable that there's about 20 to 25 minutes at least of this film that could be cut out. With all that being said though, I think every single performance in this film is wonderful. All of the characters feel very multifaceted, they're very nuanced, there's little quirks about each of them that make them each very distinguishable. Even the ones like Emma Stone's or Austin Butler's who are not developed at all in the slightest, there's still things about them facially or even little stims they do that make them memorable. And even though not all of these themes are fully dissectable, these characters still make them engaging to watch even in their most excruciating or even boring points. I think the characters are this film's strongest suit. Ari Aster is really great at developing characters and making characters that aren't even that developed still memorable. Also, it tackles a pretty miraculous feat in making humor about COVID and poking fun at literally every human being on the planet genuinely really funny. COVID is still a pretty sore subject for a lot of people, and the last thing that most humans on this planet want to do is to be reminded how stupid they were once, especially when they're trying to watch some form of escapist entertainment. The clip of Ari Aster at Cannes is pretty much famous now of when the lights came up in the auditorium. He was like, I can't tell if I should be saying thank you or I'm sorry, because this film makes fun of everybody ruthlessly, and whether or not you're gonna vibe with that is entirely up to your own expectations of what a film like this should do. But I also feel like if you're someone who engages in the socio-cultural landscape, if you're capable of throwing stones and laughing at people getting stones thrown at them, you should be able to take it just as well. I'd also like to highlight the score. It's the most unique score in Aster's filmography yet because it's very all-encompassing. This film tries to tackle a lot of different genres, very successfully so, and I think a lot of that has to do with the score. I haven't sat down and listened to it yet, but hopefully when I do, it'll resonate more with me because there's a lot to take in with the score, just like everything else in the film. And I think at the very least, even if it's something that you don't rock with, you at least have to respect the swings that this score takes, because it takes a lot of them. In terms of sound, there's some iffy ADR at points. The film utilizes a lot of wide angles, and the ADR itself isn't mixed poorly, but when the angles in this film are so wide, it's a bit easier to tell when characters' mouths aren't exactly saying the thing that you're hearing. So the actual mix isn't bad, it's just I think they underestimated how much ADR they were gonna have to do with the amount of wide angles they utilized. And so it's a sort of, we shot ourselves in the foot, but we can't really fix it in post anymore. So it's really kind of a non-issue. It's just something I noticed. It never really took me out. There's one scene in particular where Joaquin Phoenix is speaking to Emma Stone's character through a window. She's in the foreground, he's in the background, and so it's a kind of a medium wide the entire time, and anytime Emma Stone's character has to speak, it's pretty clear that it's not what was said on set. That's the only time it ever felt egregious to me. Anything else was just, oh, I caught that line. That line was probably re-recorded. Not a huge issue. Also, lastly, I want to talk about one more thing that up until this point has never been an issue of mine with Aster's filmography. It's been an issue of other people's, but I've never seen a problem. And I still don't think it's an issue this time, but he's getting close. And that has to do with shock value. Ari Aster is obviously no secret to graphic violence or sexual imagery or just freaky things in general. And Hereditary and Midsommar are far more graphic than Beau is Afraid or Eddington. Eddington is his least graphic film, I think undeniably, especially until the last 15 minutes. The last 15 minutes get pretty brutal, but even by Ari Aster standards, I think it's his most tame. With that being said, despite the lack of violence or the lack of freaky stuff, however you want to categorize it, this film has more moments, I think, that could be interpreted as shock value for the sake of it than any of his other previous works. It still never bothered me. There's one thing in the last scene or two where I was like, okay, that's why that didn't seem to serve a purpose to me. But besides that, I understand. I'm just getting concerned that Ari is getting a little too self-righteous for his britches, and his next film he might go overboard. Not an issue right now, but it could be. So if you're someone who's had a problem with Ari Aster doing this in the past, you'll probably have an issue with him doing it again. I feel like I'm stuttering more in this video than I normally do in my movie reviews because this film is a very difficult one to talk about. I can already tell it might be the most insufferable piece of media to discuss of all time. It worked for me. I understand why it doesn't work for other people. This is one of those ones where no matter what you say, I'm like, yeah, you're right. You think it's a masterpiece? You're right. You think it's a loathsome piece of shit? Yeah, you're right. I'm obviously more positively skewed, but I totally understand why people aren't. Me, myself, I'm gonna be giving Eddington a 7 out of 10. It's highly likely that this will drastically change on my second watch because there's plenty of things I'm not sure about, But I gotta be honest, this is just where I stand right now. If you guys have seen Eddington already, let me know what you think down below in the comment section. Thank you so much as always for watching this video. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.